So today we're going to be testing 4 different lenses for vlogging on the Canon M50. And to kind of keep this a blind test, I'm going to not tell you what lens I'm using. I'm just going to put A, B, C, and D in the bottom corner. So I'm testing 4 lenses today. 3 of the lenses I think are probably the most popular vlogging lenses on this camera. And then I've thrown a 4th one in, which is a bit of a wild card, and I'll be really interested to see how that goes or what you think of that compared to the others. Now this is a full daylight test, so it's not going to tell you how these lenses are going to perform in low light, but I will try to mix in some low light vlogging or some low light footage later, because I think there are a couple components. One is the sharpness of the lens, how it looks. The other is the bokeh, what the background looks like. And another one is how it performs in low light. Another one would be how wide, like how much of the view around you are getting. So there's a few different things to be looking at as we're cycling through these different lens options. Now, keeping in mind, I'm not using any ND filters on any of these lenses, so the ability to get that sort of sharp foreground with the blurry background when we have this sort of full sun or sort of cloudy day, middle of the day situation, we're not going to be able to achieve that result exactly. And some of these lenses do have a larger aperture, the ability to actually blur out that background better than others. And so, at least for this footage, you're not going to see that advantage. But at night, when I do the low light footage, hopefully you're going to see the difference there, and you'll also see the difference in low light performance as far as the lower ISO and whether you get grain in the footage. And I have a suspicion the biggest difference you're going to see in this footage is maybe just the field of view, how much you're seeing around you, because we've got different focal lengths, so we're getting different field of views from the different lenses. And so during the daytime, yeah, that low light performance isn't going to play into it as much. I think the biggest thing you're going to see is the field of view and maybe sharpness. I'm not sure, but maybe sharpness. Keeping in mind that the demand that, and in this video I'm just shooting in full HD, which is 1080p, that's actually only 2 megapixels. So a 2 megapixel video is very different than, say, a 24 megapixel photo. I don't think the sharpness on these lenses is going to affect the video footage as much as it would the photographs, but I will definitely see that when we get back into the studio and I get it up on the computer and have a look. All right, those were the shots outside using it as sort of a vlogging sense, but I thought a lot of people who vlog and do YouTube videos also do sit-down studio style shots, and even though I'm not in my studio currently, I've set up sort of a little a makeshift setup here, and I'm gonna cycle through the 4 different lenses if you were going to also use them or they were gonna do double duty as a studio lens. Now, as I'm cycling through the lenses, I'm actually moving the camera position a little bit and actually trying to, I don't know, make best advantage of the focal length and the position that I think works best for each lens. So unlike the vlogging setup where I was holding them all at arm's length and you were seeing, you know, I actually had the camera in the same position and you were seeing the different framing you would get, I'm actually moving the camera around as if I was in a studio to get the best, what I think is studio shot with that lens in this sort of current situation and the current setup I've got. And what you might find is the lens that was great for vlogging might not be the best lens for the studio type environment, but some of them are sort of double duty lenses and some of them will work better for both, and some will be more specialized to one environment or the other. At some point, I think I've actually used all of these different lenses both for vlogging and for sort of studio work and sit down talking head type segments, but I've never actually shot these back to back like this. So I'm gonna be very interested as an experiment, even for my own purposes, to see which ones look different and how they perform in the different environments. Now we're gonna go to the low light test where I'm gonna go out at sort of a twilight time and do a sort of vlogging test in the twilight, because some of the lenses that are very, very good vlogging lenses aren't very good in low light. So I think depending on the type environment you shoot in, it's probably something you really need to know about. Now the sun's gone down about 20 minutes ago, and I think what you're gonna find is some of the lenses that perform the best during the day are potentially going to be performing the worst during twilight and in low light conditions. And many times that is because the lenses that perform best during the day have image stabilization, but they also have a smaller maximum aperture. So the lenses that might have looked a bit shaky and didn't have the image stabilization are going to be able to open up wider and let more light in. They're still going to be shaky, not as stable, but the extra light, I think, might be worth the sacrifice. And as we continue to lose light, I think what you're going to find is these first couple lenses are going to get to the point where they're really unusable. And when we throw the next couple on, I think you're going to see it probably practically looks like it's still daytime. I'm just looking at the ISO. It's already run the ISO up to 6400 on this lens, and it's still significantly underexposed. So I would suggest this footage is really barely going to be usable at this point, and I can even see the autofocus is struggling to find my face, even though I can clearly see my face in the display. And although we're continuing to lose light and it's much darker than it was, even when I shot with the last lens, I can see that it almost looks like daytime. It did have to go up to 6400 ISO to get this shot, but you can see that I am properly exposed, and the shot looks pretty good on the screen. So I'll be interested to see what it looks like when we get inside, but I would say undoubtedly this image is far more usable than the previous lens. Now the sun is going down quick. It is getting darker shot by shot, so I'm probably not really giving a complete apples to apples comparison. And particularly probably not being completely fair to this last lens in particular. But I mean, it's so dark, I can even see the reflection of the screen on my glasses. I mean, it is getting very, very dark now. But certainly these last two lenses have outperformed the earlier two lenses. Now, I just decided, just for a bonus round, I noticed there's just a street light out front of the house that I'm staying at right now. And I'm going to come back and actually try to shoot by street light and see if you could actually vlog by street light with any of these lenses. All right, since you're hardly going to be able to see my face in these first two lenses, I'm going to talk a bit about audio, because we make such a big deal about video and lenses. But honestly, the audio, good quality audio, is more important than good quality video in most situations. And a good way to think about this is people will sit for hours and hours and listen to a podcast. But how many people do you know will sit for an hour and watch a video with terrible, crackly, or poor quality audio? It really just doesn't happen. Bad audio will ruin any video, regardless of the quality of the footage. And the microphone you're listening to right now is a $30 microphone that comes with a shock mount. It comes with two different cables, one for your camera and one for your computer or your phone. And it comes with a carrying bag for $30. It's half the price of the most popular Rode microphone, the most popular budget Rode microphone for the M50. So for me, in all of my filmmaking and all of my YouTube video days, this single purchase is probably the best value purchase of anything I've bought. And I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested in that microphone. What a difference this lens has made. This is unbelievable. Same light, I really haven't changed anything. This is just the lens that really performs the best in low light. And although this lens is clearly the second best of the bunch, man, you can really tell that last lens, yeah, I mean, that was unbelievable. That was really great footage, and it is pitch black out here. I don't have any moonlight. All I've got is just the one street lamp up here. You can see. I just wanted to come back to this lens because it really does open up some possibilities of getting footage at night, like night vlogging or lifestyle, or if you're in the city looking at lights or Christmas lights or anything in low light. You actually, I mean, we are still at 6400 ISO and we're still underexposed, but in nighttime scenes I don't mind that. It actually shows that it is dark out, and you probably would have to run some denoise or something just to smooth this out, although once we upload it to YouTube I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see any of the noise or grain at all. But yeah, I'm looking at this thing on the screen and I'm actually seeing more than I am just with my own naked eyes. I mean, it is practically like night vision. So this really does open up some strong possibilities of what you can do in a dark situation or at night, or really some creative filmmaking or vlogging. Now, there are a couple quick things I just want to mention before we get into the reveal of what lens was what. The first one is, in those low light and twilight tests, I was running the ISO on the camera up to 6400. and you really don't want to run this camera at 6400 ISO, and you may have been able to see all the noise in some of those shots. I really probably should have used it in lighting conditions, at least in the twilight, where I could shoot at about 1600 ISO. So 6400 is a bit much for this camera. 1600 and below is really good. 3200 starting to push it, and 6400, well, it's only usable if you really run some sort of noise filter over it. And the other thing I should mention is in the twilight shots, the light was going pretty quickly, so lens A was actually getting a fair bit more light than lens D, and certainly lenses C and D were letting in the most light. But if you compare A to D, it doesn't look like D is any better than A, when in actual fact it was significantly better as far as how much light it was letting in, because it was actually much darker when I was shooting with lens D. And the other thing I just wanted to show you was that little $30 microphone I was talking about. There it is, comes with the dead cat, comes with the little shock mount and the little coil cable. For 30 bucks, it probably is the best thing I bought for YouTube. Now lens A was actually the kit lens. And I included that because the M50 with the kit lens is probably the most popular vlogging setup on YouTube. Like, it is, the M50 is one of Canon's top selling cameras for the past few years. It is certainly one of the top used cameras on YouTube and for vlogging. And since the kit lens goes down to 15 millimeters, that is, as you saw, wide enough to vlog with. And the primary reason I included it, even though you probably already have this lens if you bought it in a kit and you know what it looks like, is it gives you a comparison. If you already have that lens, what are you getting if you buy one of the 3 other lenses that I showed in the comparison? And for me, I actually think for vlogging and for video, the kit lens is pretty good. Now, it gets a hard time about not being as sharp as some other lenses, but to be honest, when we're talking about video on the M50 and we're shooting full HD or 1080p, we're really only resolving 2 megapixels. And certainly this lens is plenty good enough to resolve 2 megapixels. And as you may have seen in the comparison I did, it was actually sharper than my copy of the second lens, which is probably the other most popular vlogging lens for the Canon M50. And that is the 11 to 22 millimeter EFM lens. Now, people rave about the quality of this lens, and it is really considered the king of vlogging lenses for the Canon M50. But my copy of the lens has just always been soft. It really has not been a great lens for me. And I keep going back to it and trying to use it, but the footage that comes out of it and the photos that come out of it are just soft. Like, I really like that field of view at 11 millimeters. It really does give you a lot of context of what's around you if you're vlogging. And I think that is a good look, and I think it looked quite good in the shots that I did in the samples. But it was the softest lens of the 4 I tested. And in recently asking some questions on some of the forums to see if other people had problems with their 11 to 22 or if they were getting soft images out of them, what I found was a number of people raving about the lens, but then a number of people saying they got soft copies and just gave up. There was another guy who said it took him 3 copies to get a sharp one. So I think there is some variability in the quality and the sharpness on this lens. And so if you like that field of view, if you like the way that B image of the 11 to 22 looked, then I would say if you do go grab one of these 11 to 22s, that you should definitely take it and test it and see if you've got a sharp copy or if you've got a soft copy like mine. Because in my mind, a soft copy really isn't worth owning. And because of that, I actually use the 15 to 45 lens more than I use the 11 to 22 lens, even though I like the field of view better in the 11 to 22. I just can't deal with the soft, poor quality image. The other thing that should be noted on the 11 to 22 millimeter is the maximum aperture is 4.0, and then it gets smaller from there. So of the 4 lenses we've tested today, it is absolutely the worst in low light. I mean, at 4.0 on the 11 millimeter end, even that is very difficult to use even inside. I would suggest even in normal indoor lighting conditions, you're probably going to be at 1600 ISO already. And you get any darker than that or dark indoor conditions, the ISO is going to crank up. You're going to get a lot of grain in your footage, and it just isn't going to look very good. And the lens I've got on right now is lens C, which is the Sigma 16mm f1.4. And this was the lens that performed unbelievably well in low light. It was miles ahead of the other lenses as far as a low light lens goes. And I think it looked the best for the studio shot as well. And that's why I'm using it in this shot right now. But the one thing with this lens, although the aperture does open quite wide, allows you to get more of a blurry background and lets in more light for those low light shots, there is no image stabilization on this lens. So if you look in some of the earlier shots, when I'm in the daylight shots, the lens A and B both have image stabilization. This lens does not. And if you go back and look at it, you will see the micro jitters in that shot. Now, I was holding on the end of a Joby Gorillapod, and I mean, I was holding as steady as I could. I wasn't walking around. But you could definitely see the micro jitters, and I think for those good lighting condition vlogging style shots, the image stabilized lenses and the image stabilized shots of lens A and B was superior to this one. But for low light conditions, the other ones were virtually unusable. And in studio conditions where you want to get some sort of a blurry background, this is the only lens that's really going to do it to any real extent. So in this lens, you are trading the image stabilization for better low light performance and a better blurry background, better studio looking shot. You're also getting a much sharper image with this lens. Keeping in mind, it is less versatile because it is not a zoom lens. You are stuck with 16mm. But I do think that buying this lens for the Canon M50 really does add a whole different element to using this camera. And I'm finding more and more people are starting with the kit lens, the 15-45, and then the next lens they're buying is either the 11-22, but more often than not, I think people are now buying the 16mm. And I think that's because the 15-45 is wide enough to vlog with. The 11-22 does give a quite a good shot, and that wide shot is really cool. But the 16mm allows you to blur out the background, get a totally different look, and use the camera in low light conditions where it becomes unusable if you only have the 15-45 and the 11-22. So if you've got the kit lens and you're looking to add a second lens, then I think this lens really bears some serious consideration. And lens D was the wild card lens. Now, this is the Rokinon 12mm f2 lens, and it is a manual focus, manual aperture lens. So this is a whole different thing. I actually bought this lens specifically for astrophotography, but because it does let in a lot of light and it does have a sort of a very wide field of view, I thought this could be a lens that could be used for vlogging. But the fact that it's manual focus, and what you'll see is in the first shot you found that I missed focus in that shot. And particularly if you're using this at f2, your field of view, the amount that is actually in focus is quite narrow. So to use it, you have to set it up, get it focused, look on the screen, it looks good, but if you move the lens in or out at all towards your face at all, you're gonna lose focus. So as far as walking around and vlogging, I don't think it's really all that usable. But the one place I was quite surprised with it was in the studio shot. I thought it looked quite good in the studio shot. So if you are into astrophotography and you also wanted a lens to give you a very cool studio shot, then I think this one could be considered to do that double duty. So which of these lenses should you buy to use for vlogging with the Canon M50? Well, my thought is if you've already got the 15-45 and you're not really obsessed with that extra field of view that the 11-22 is going to give you, then I think you have to go with the Sigma 16mm. And these are fairly similarly priced. I think the 11-22 is a little bit cheaper, but the 11-22, for the most part, all it does is everything that the 15-45 does. It just does it a little bit wider and does it worse in low light. So you get a little bit of width. You also might have the same issue that I have with a soft focus or a soft image. But if you get the Sigma 16mm, first of all, you're going to get a tack sharp image, which is unbelievably sharp image on this lens. You're going to get the ability to blur out the background and do some really cool studio shots. You're going to get a lens that performs really, really well in low light. I think you add a lot more to the M50 and what you can do with it with this lens versus the other three, and particularly the 11-22. But when it comes down to it, it's really all personal preference, so it's up to you which one you like the best. If you're interested in the Canon M50 or the Canon mirrorless system, I'm currently doing a series 100 videos on these cameras and the lenses that go with them. So be sure to subscribe to the channel because I've got a bunch more tests and stuff like this coming out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.